I guess.
Yeah, yeah. I'm kind of recalling, I believe my first class, I believe it was Ed Allen who was instructional media, and I think he worked as an instructor for the art department or something. I'm not sure exactly what the relationship was, because he was full-time, I think, instructional media, but I think he taught the mechanics of photography.
I remember that name, and I think it had to do with you, yeah.
Yeah, and in fact, probably, I think I'd been working at instructional media, and that's probably how I found out about the art department having a darkroom, and he probably said, hey, you should sign up for this class so you can use the darkroom, something along those lines. But the first class I had, I believe, with an art faculty would have been Craig Kaufman, and I think just the way he had of just sort of smiling and enjoying what he was doing and what he was talking about. I think it was probably color theory or something, if I remember, and it was in a lecture hall with maybe 100 students or so. But it was just really fascinating, and I hadn't actually had any color theory before, so just learning some of the things about how colors laying next to each other will form relationships, and the same color will look different surrounded by a different colored background, this type of thing. Just very basic elementary. It was like a 101, I'm sure, beginning, but it was just like brand new for me. I'd never had an art class and hadn't thought about that stuff, but it all kind of made sense, and I think there was that energy with the faculty and excitement about what was going on. I think it was that energy and excitement that was really important and really kind of drew you in.
So I'm curious about the best kept secrets part of this whole thing, and I'm wondering where that happens in terms of why was this such a secret for so long? I tend to take a sort of conspiratorial viewpoint of it, that the art establishment in Los Angeles didn't want to acknowledge that there was something interesting going on in Orange County. And we found that with the floating wall, that it was hard to get people, certainly from the LA Times, which was the newspaper, the media at the time, to come down and take us seriously, even though we, of course, took ourselves very, very seriously, and we thought we were extremely important. We wanted to try to pull that interest down to Orange County, and it was very difficult to do. And I had the sense that the whole UCI energy was maybe a little bit threatening to the more established academia of UCLA and the state colleges wanting to have their sense of being the aesthetic engine that's driving Southern California. And here's this little upstart, brand new art department with, hiring all these artists and doing all this incredibly interesting and creative work.
Yeah, I think that could certainly be a big part of it, and also I think New York, even amongst the faculty and so forth, I think there was this sort of sense I'd been told, if you're going to be serious about being an artist, you're going to have to go put some time in New York, even if you come back.
Do some time in New York.
Yeah. And so maybe a secret, and I think that's part of what this whole PST thing is about, is saying, well, there was something going on here, even though it may not have been acknowledged or at the time. And I think there was also another kind of a funny thing that happened to me when I was looking around for graduate school. I went up to check out Cal Arts, and I went into the art department because I'd come out of the art department at Irvine and done like photography and odd media type stuff, I guess. And so I'm kind of saying, well, I do photographs. I guess I had some sort of a portfolio or something I was showing them. And they said, oh, those are photographs. You should go talk to the photography department. So I went and talked to the photography department, and they said, well, this stuff really looks like you should be in the art department. You're doing the kind of stuff they do. And I think John Baldessari was there at the time. And but at any rate, but they said, well, why don't you? We've got somebody guest lecturing from Cal State Fullerton on photography. Why don't you just hang around and look at that lecture? And it was Ron Layton, and so I talked to him and ended up at Cal State Fullerton, just sort of.
Well, so your trip to Cal Arts was very productive.
I guess so.
Yeah.
And I mean, and if there'd been a different person in the office, or who knows what would have happened otherwise, But I just thought it was kind of interesting that maybe what I was doing, I think it had to do with, it's difficult to remember how new some of that stuff was at the time. And of course, it's all based on, prior work. I mean, there were people moving in those sorts of directions and, and modern movement. I'm not an art historian, so I don't want to try and drop a bunch of names and put it all together. That's for people that are good at that. But there is a continuity, but I think there was some really new stuff going on at UC Irvine, and it was allowed and encouraged, and it was like, what's interesting, and it doesn't matter whether it fits a category or not.
Yeah, it was very cross-discipline, or whatever the term is for that. But,
right.
You could come into a painting class with things that weren't paintings, and it would be okay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I appreciated that. I really appreciated that a lot. In fact, that's sort of why I drifted from painting into sculpture, because sculpture had fewer of those kinds of limitations. Anything can be a sculpture, but a painting is much more proscribed by tradition.
Right. Right. Now, some of the other things, we're probably reaching our tape length before too long, but I guess we should mention that even though everything seems all like rosy and in retrospect and so forth, there were certainly some controversies going on, and seems to me you had a real hard time. Didn't you do something with a pistol and a target in the gallery?
Yeah, I did.
And
that was my graduate project, in fact.
Okay,
I with my handgun in
right.
the gallery, and actually that wasn't that controversial. I got permission from everybody, including the cops.
Okay.
Everyone was very helpful. I walked into the police station with this proposal to have a handgun in the gallery, and it was like, well, what can we do to help? I mean, it was really remarkably. Everyone was encouraging of this, because it was very different as art was being more and more deconstructed. You mentioned Baldessari, and Saul LeWitt had been to the gallery at some point, and all of that stuff. So I did an installation as a graduate program, my graduate project. The exhibition was this pistol sitting on a pedestal, and there was a target at the other end of the room that had holes in it, and that was pretty much the whole exhibit. Very little else beyond that. But the cops made me secure the gun so that it was unfireable, and we locked it down to the pedestal with a bolt and a thing, and without doing any damage to the gun or without anything obvious or visible. It was pretty cool. And the main police officer, I can't remember his name. He was the nicest guy. He actually took apart his home security system with some sort of motion detector thing, and we rigged it underneath the pedestal so that if anyone tried to bump or harass this thing too much, it would set off an alarm somewhere. I mean, it was really pretty cool.
Wow, that's great. Yeah, I hadn't realized
that. We were definitely encouraged to experiment, even by people beyond the art department.
Right. I do remember Richard Newton's Beggar's Banquet being removed sort of over a weekend or in the middle of the night without his permission, though. So that.
Oh, I do remember something about that.
Yeah. So.
Why was that? Do you remember why?
Well, the excuse was that it was drawing. It's an agricultural area. UC Irvine, by the way, back then was just kind of out in the middle of the fields. It was the Irvine Ranch had donated some property to the university, and it was just out in the middle of. There were cattle drives through campus occasionally. Back in the late 60s, I can remember that happening. And
really?
Yeah, not too often, but at least once there was a cattle drive through, just sort of, I guess it would have been to the west of campus, maybe up towards the hills. But at any rate, and there was a farm school out there. I think they called it the farm school or the farmhouse out.
Yes, I remember, yeah.
Yeah, and people used to hang out there. Another place people from the art department specifically hung out was at the bar or whatever it was across from campus. I mean, campus was just out in the middle of nowhere. You'd have to drive a number of miles to get into even Costa Mesa or something. And but there was this bar across there, after.
Oh, at the town center where
at
the
town
bookstore
center.
was and stuff.
Yeah, right in the
That
same.
was the beer hall. It was called Fritz Garden.
Oh, that's right, Swiss Garden. Yeah,
I drank a few there.
Yeah, I remember Ed Moses would go over and I specifically remember him going over and hanging out with students, and I think I learned a lot. So for people that had studios or lives outside of the dorms or something, I think this kind of stuff probably goes on or went on. But it was really great to have that kind of experience at near campus where it was accessible to students.
Yes, it was like the other classroom.
Exactly. I think I learned as much there listening to people as I learned in the classes.
Yes. One thing I do want to mention, and I've thought about this just lately, is that I've always had this sense that we were neglected by the fine arts administration in Garrison specifically, because of his preference for the performing arts. So the visual arts just sort of had to kind of fend for themselves. That was always my sense. I don't know if this is accurate, if it was just paranoid teen student fantasy, but if that's true, and I have a sense that it was, that may have contributed to that academic freedom, that aesthetic freedom to experiment, in that we weren't restricted by some higher up, that the art department was very autonomous and able to chart its own course as long as it didn't fly in the face too much of the powers higher up the academic chain. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it does, and it's unclear. The little bit of reading I've done just recently on the subject, it seems he isn't really mentioned in relationship to the art faculty. It appears that it was his predecessor, perhaps, that drew together this sort of critical mass, and then I guess that probably drew in additional faculty. So I think they may have just been there in spite of him, or without relationship to him, and again, that's sort of like the art department sort of being sort of self-destined in a way, maybe. They were just kind of going off doing what they knew they should be doing, and to a degree detached from the rest of fine arts. I was in orchestra for a while, which so I had been, I guess my exposure to arts had been through music, and I was in orchestra for the first 2 or 3 years at Irvine, and it was getting to be, I'd have rehearsals basically every night, sometimes seven nights a week, be in rehearsals, and I finally had to drop out because I had to do some artwork too.
I don't remember that about you. What instrument did you play?
Timpani. And
I do remember that. I wouldn't. That's if you hadn't mentioned it, I never would have remembered that.
Yeah. So in fact, one of the music majors, the year that I dropped it, saw me in the fall, walking across Fine Arts Village, and he said, "Hey, you're not in orchestra. How can you do that being a music major?" And I said, "I'm not a music major." So, anyway, that kind of kept me. It was interesting. I probably wouldn't have finished school had it not been for the really incredible art department there and being able to get engaged there. I don't know that I would have really become a musician, although I guess I was, good enough for them to keep me employed there, so to speak. They were keeping me pretty busy. There weren't too many percussionists. So I mostly did timpani, but did the other stuff too. But at any rate, I guess I found the visual arts more engaging and more interesting in a lot of respects.
I didn't hear that last bit. It got garbled.
Yeah, your video is frozen at the moment. I think our bandwidth may be having a little bit of trouble. So you're Yeah, your lips are not moving, but I'm
waving my hand. In fact.
Oh, okay, yeah, I'm
not waving.
Not seeing
what
that.
What do you feel about that?
But well,
But you can hear me apparently, so okay.
I can hear you fine. Yeah, the audio is coming through fine, and